Night fell across the French countryside in June 1944, the land shrouded by darkness thick with anticipation and dread. Somewhere east of Carentan, the twisted frames of ruined barns cast long shadows on muddy lanes. On the horizon, the fractured thunder of artillery was a constant, distant drum. Under a shattered oak tree, Obergefreiter Helmut Weber crouched with his rifle, staring out toward the American lines. His thoughts, like his orders, were clouded by confusion. He glanced at his squad leader. "Have we heard anything about enemy armor movements?" Sergeant Miller shook his head, his eyes reflecting the pale flicker of a cigarette. "The last message came hours ago. Command lost contact with the forward post at Saint-Lô. Radio's dead weight with all the interference. We'll know when they're here, when we hear the engine noise." But the engines didn't come with a roar. They came with silence. At first, a hush that settled into the bones of the night, the kind that made every sense quiver. Helmut strained to listen, but there was nothing, only the brush of wind and the distant crash of a shell. Then, through the gloom, something moved. Dark, hulking shapes slid through the moonlight, perfectly coordinated, fanned out like a hunter's net. Inside Sherman tank Lucky 7, Corporal Tom Reese kept one hand on the radio dial, the other on the engine throttle. The interior buzzed with quiet chatter, no shouting, just clear, clipped voices as if they were in the same room. "All units, advance to checkpoint Alice. Infantry, move up behind the hedge, Delta team ready on my go." Tom's commander, Lieutenant Miller, looked back at the crew with a half smile. "It's like we're cheating," he joked, his breath forming steam in the narrow space. "Sure feels that way," Tom grinned. "This thing's got more wires than my old man's workshop." Outside, the platoon responded in unison, Shermans fanning out across the hedgerows, infantry weaving between the armored hulls. Information flowed instantly. Every change in the plan relayed and understood before the enemy could even spot them. Overhead, the higher command's signal sliced through the static, orchestrating an entire battle like a conductor with a silent baton. Meanwhile, the German defenders scrambled. Weber and his comrades peered into the dark, trying to guess the shape and scale of the attack. Their only communication was a battered field telephone, the cord patched and fraying, barely functional. Every message was delayed, distorted, or simply lost. "We've lost 2nd Platoon," Sergeant Miller shouted. "Are the Panzers in position?" "No word from command," another voice replied. "We're blind out here, completely blind." Helmut pressed his face against a gap in the ruined stone wall, heart pounding. The ground vibrated. Tank engines, now. Closer, heavier, Shermans, and plenty of them. But there was no panic in their movement, no hesitation, no wasted time. The Americans were everywhere and nowhere at once. Inside Lucky 7, Miller's voice was calm through the headset. "Enemy on the right, wait for my mark. All tanks, pivot left, lay down suppressive fire at grid Charlie 2. They swung in perfect formation, guns blazing at the enemy strongpoint Miller had called out moments earlier. The German position evaporated under fire, the troops never seeing what hit them. Back on the German side, chaos reigned. Radio traffic was hopeless, a mess of static and confused reports. "Did you see them? Where is our support? Panzer IV is down, out of contact. Fall back! Fall back!" Helmut wanted to scream for orders, for someone to tell him what was happening, but his headset was nothing but hissing silence. There was no map in his head, no signal to trust, only instinct, only fear. In the command track that coordinated the Sherman assault, Captain Harold Burns listened to 3 battalions on the same frequency. "Charlie, ready to flank. Baker, hold for the counterattack. Echo, tighten up your right." Not a single word lost, not a single command misunderstood. To the Americans, the battlefield was a living, breathing map, drawn in real time through their radios. But to the German soldiers on the other side, it was a fog of war thicker than the mist rolling between the trees. As dawn crept up on the broken towns and battered farmhouses of Normandy, Helmut Weber and his comrades fell back, deaf to each other, watched by Sherman tankers who always seemed to know, somehow, exactly where they were and exactly where to strike next. He wondered later what strange fate had let the enemy move like they had eyes everywhere, and why their own machines never seemed to speak. The rain began before dawn, slow at first, then relentless. By sunrise, the battlefield was mud, thick, clinging, merciless. Tanks churned the ground into swamps, boots sank with every step, and helmets gleamed under gray sheets of water. The sky hung low, heavy with smoke and thunder. But through it all, American tank radios crackled, alive with chatter and clarity. Inside Lucky 7, Corporal Tom Reese adjusted his headset and blew a sigh of steam into his gloved hands. "Signal good, command?" "Loud and clear," came the reply, crystal and immediate. "Company Bravo advancing on your left. Don't fire till they crest the ridge." "Copy?" "Copy that," Miller responded, his tone steady. "Tell them they've got 2 bazooka teams shadowing us." The air filled with static, then another voice broke in from 2 miles away. "Understood, Lieutenant. We'll flank with your line." And so they moved, 5 Shermans and a swarm of infantry, inching forward through hedgerows and orchards. Every motion coordinated by words, traveling through the air faster than the enemy could even react. A few hundred meters away, Helmut Weber wiped mud from his rifle barrel. Around him, the platoon huddled in the ruins of an old farmhouse, waiting for new orders that never came. The field telephone was dead again, lines cut by bomb blasts. The messenger they had sent to Battalion HQ yesterday never returned. "Do we counterattack?" one soldier asked. "Do we move?" Another replied bitterly. "How would we know?" In the distance, they could hear explosions, rhythmic, deliberate, like someone hammering the earth with perfect precision. When they saw the flashes on the horizon, they knew the Americans had found another target. But how? They hadn't seen patrols, hadn't heard aircraft, there had been no scouts. The strikes came as if their every move were being watched. In truth, it wasn't eyes, it was ears. Ears connected by invisible wires of radio waves linking tank to tank, troop to troop. To the Americans, every explosion was the result of data moving instantly across miles, guiding coordinated strikes before the Germans could adapt. In Lucky 7, Miller leaned toward his headset. "We've got resistance in Sector C4. Report movement, anyone?" "C3 clear," a companion voice from another Sherman answered. "C5 engaged, light resistance." A few seconds later, air support chimed in. "Roger that," visual confirmed. "Adjust fire north by 100 yards. And somewhere beyond the hills, the thunder of artillery responded almost before Miller finished speaking. The timing was surgical. Helmut's squad wasn't just outgunned, they were out of rhythm. Orders came hours late, soldiers attacked in confusion, artillery landed off target. Every attempt to re-establish communication failed under the pressure of interference and chaos. "They're hitting us before we even move," cried one of the younger soldiers. "How do they know where we are?" Sergeant Miller slammed his fist into a wall. "They've got scouts in the air. They must. Or—" he hesitated, his words trailing off as his mind searched for logic in the madness. "They're everywhere at once." Back in the American formation, Miller's tank slowed at a crossroads lined with shattered trees. "Command, we've secured the junction," he radioed. "Enemy positions seem scattered, confused. They're firing blindly." "Roger that," came the calm reply from headquarters, 20 miles away. "Proceed to secondary objective. Division reports scattered resistance. Estimate full German withdrawal within 24 hours. Tom exhaled, his heart pounding. 24 hours? The enemy had no idea what was really defeating them. Not superior armor, not greater numbers, but something far simpler. Communication. That single advantage turned chaos into choreography, chance into certainty. The Shermans moved as a living organism, guided by a shared voice. Even under fire, every man heard the plan, every change in real time. By mid-morning, the American columns had broken through the bocage, their movements impossibly precise. Observers from the rear could hardly believe it. Tank platoons threading narrow lanes, infantry shifting seamlessly behind cover, artillery fire appearing exactly where it was needed. Soldiers began to whisper that the Americans had developed some new magic in their machines. But it wasn't magic, it was technology. The radios inside every Sherman were something the Germans had never truly understood. Compact, reliable, built in staggering numbers, and so clear that entire divisions could move as one voice. Helmut crouched beside the road as his unit fell back again, mud splattering off his coat. In the distance, the Americans advanced, calm, quiet, unshakable. He stared at the rising dust and murmured, "They don't fight like men. They fight like they already know what we'll do." He was right, in a way. The Americans weren't reacting. They were communicating faster than reality could shift. Every thought, every command, transmitted before confusion could take root. And as the rain kept falling, the difference between silence and signal became the invisible front line. It was midday in Normandy, and the air was thick with smoke and sweat. Panzers brewed up along the tree line, paint blistered by flames, hatches jammed shut. Overhead, artillery boomed in relentless waves. Somewhere in the crossfire, Helmut Weber's squad huddled beside a wrecked Kubelwagen, peering through binoculars at the American advance. It should have been possible to counterattack, they thought. Local units had tanks, guns, trained men, but all order had unraveled. The battalion radio was gone. The antenna snapped in the first barrage. Runner messages didn't make it through the barrage. Every squad operated in isolation, each guessing at the greater plan. It was war by instinct, not by design. "Is the attack ready?" Miller asked. "No word," another replied. "We got an order to hold, but then nothing." Their platoon attempted a flank maneuver, moving in hoping to surprise the Shermans. But nothing was synchronized. The second squad held back, waiting for a signal that never came. The third, cut off by artillery, turned back altogether. No one even knew which unit was on their left. Through a battered periscope, Helmut glimpsed Sherman tanks halting, then fanning out across open ground. It was as if they shared a single mind, pivoting in unison so quickly that the usual German defensive tricks, waiting, baiting, ambushing, no longer applied. Within Sherman Lucky 7, the scene was almost surreal. The inside world hummed with radio voices. "Bravo, swing right at the orchard. 4 German tanks ahead." "Copy, swinging right." "Artillery support ready for our mark." "Infantry, move up." Orders layered over tactical adjustments and reports from air reconnaissance poured in, each soldier guided with certainty. Tom Reese braced as the tank lurched forward. "Enemy on our left," came over the radio, and before anyone could panic, Miller called out, "Delta platoon, suppress that position." The response was almost instant. Delta's Shermans rolled up, loosed 3 rounds, and silence returned. German troops, meanwhile, struggled for cohesion. One field battery fired at an old map location, unaware the battle line shifted miles away. A Panzer IV attempted a retreat, but its orders reached only the driver, not the support infantry, so the tank sped off alone, exposed and quickly disabled. Helmut heard one squad's desperate call for help, static-laced, distant, useless. "Is anybody out there? Can you guide us?" No answer, only the hiss of the battered speaker. It was a battle within 2 worlds, one of synchronized movement, every decision amplified by technology, the other, fragmented, caught between bravery and uncertainty. American tank crews marveled at their own capability. Air support, artillery, infantry, and armor linked together, all under the steady pulse of communication. "Target acquired," a gunner called, and headquarters tracked their progress from miles away. Even under heavy fire, unity held. Losses stung, but for every breakdown, coordination filled the gap in seconds. German officers in makeshift bunkers scribbled notes, then watched helplessly as their messages failed to change the battlefield. Some tried signaling with colored flares, but the chaos drowned out every color with exploding shells. By late afternoon, Helmut's squad was down to a handful. Müller lay injured, clutching the broken receiver. Helmut covered him with a raincoat and, looking out at the advancing line of Sherman tanks, realized how hopeless it all felt. He remembered his training, his pride in German precision, and the stories of Rommel's lightning signals in Africa. But here, those lessons vanished. The Americans were everywhere, linked by invisible voices. Tom Reese, inside his Sherman, caught Miller's crumpled figure through the periscope. For a moment, he felt a pang. This wasn't heroism. It was annihilation made efficient, a contest decided by silence and signal. As dusk fell, the Americans pressed onward. The German line collapsed altogether, units dissolved, soldiers surrendered in small pockets, and the battlefield emptied. The true horror was this: the enemy hadn't needed overwhelming force. They won by knowing, by linking their minds in real time. Helmut stared at the wrecked field set and whispered, "We were never in this fight, not really." By nightfall, the fields once vibrant with chaos lay quiet. Piles of spent shells cooled in puddles, broken tracks lay twisted like bones, and the unnerving silence replaced the thunder of tank engines. Surrendering Germans clustered in collapsed barns or stumbled along ditches, their exhausted faces streaked with mud and defeat. Helmut Weber and a handful of survivors waited as distant American headlights glimmered on the horizon. He tried the field radio once more, a final act of hope, but the speaker spit out static empty as the hopes he still held. One American sergeant walked the lines, collecting the discarded Mausers and sidearms from his new prisoners. "You boys fought hard," he said quietly, "but you didn't stand a chance. Not against the net we made." Helmut could not speak. He watched as Tom Rees's Sherman rolled past, its crew silent, eyes shadowed, men victorious by design but sobered by what victory demanded. The Americans gathered around their tanks for debriefing, the night air alive with the soft clicks and buzzes of active radios. Miller wrote in his field book, "Enemy utterly disorganized. Few coordinated counterattacks. Our radio advantage confirmed." Tom added his own note. "We were everywhere at once. Couldn't lose each other if we tried." As the days moved on, the narrative of the battle echoed through headquarters and press offices alike. Reports credited the Sherman's radios as the war's invisible force, bypassing chaos and carving order from confusion. Commanders praised expedience, but veteran tankers knew the true cost. Their enemy had relied on courage and experience, while they, almost silently, fought a different war. In the ruins, German officers tried to explain what happened. Their tanks moved like water, always finding the cracks. How is it possible? A young signals officer, his uniform still clean, replied, "We lost to an enemy that could speak with a single voice." The words hung in the air. The survivors of both armies felt the change sweeping through warfare. No longer would victory hinge just on hardened steel or the will to fight. Now, information, speed, response, these invisible weapons would decide fates. Helmut thought of home, of the old field radio his father used during harvest seasons. It was almost laughable, old, crackling, unreliable, so like the one that failed him in Normandy. In the Sherman camp, Tom cleaned his headset, reflecting on how it had become his lifeline, the circuit that let strangers become a single, unstoppable force. For some, the end of the battle meant only another day. Marches, more commands, new objectives. But for others, it marked the end of certainty. No lesson of bravery, no measure of mechanical mastery, nothing but the quiet realization that war had, in this moment, changed forever. On the third evening, with dust settling over the fields and barn roofs, German and American wounded sat within earshot in the makeshift hospital. Miller passed by, glancing at Helmut, both men forever tied to the land and the silence between them. "It wasn't just their guns, was it?" a medic asked. "No," Helmut replied after a long pause. "It was the way their voices found each other in the fight." The medic placed a hand on his shoulder. "We all listen for something out here." As the last Shermans rolled east and the morning sun washed away the scars of battle, static hung in the air, a memory, not of explosions, but of the many unheard signals that decided who survived. Today, historians credit Sherman tank radios as one of the American Army's greatest secrets, a blend of technology and teamwork unseen before. For soldiers like Helmut Weber and Tom Rees, no medal could ever honor the silent bond that won the war for some and left others wondering forever what might have been if only they'd heard the call. The echoes remain, soft, invisible, eternal. The war for information had begun.